You ever wonder how economists try to get their heads around the entire, massive, complicated economy of a country, all at once? How they model the booms and busts that affect every single one of us? Well, today, we're going to build that very model, piece by piece. And we're going to start by looking back at a time when getting it wrong led to an absolute catastrophe.
So, picture this. It's 1929, the Roaring Twenties. The economy is on fire. It feels like the party will never, ever end. Then, a group of Harvard economists puts out a warning. A recession is coming. And, well, almost nobody listens. In fact, things seem so good they even withdrew their own forecast. Turns out, they weren't wrong. They were just early. The Great Depression was right around the corner.
And what a collapse it was. By 1933, the economy hadn't just taken a dip, it had completely fallen off a cliff. Real GDP, that's the total output of the entire country, had plunged by nearly a third. Unemployment shot up from around 3% to a staggering 25%. This wasn't just a recession, this was the system breaking down. A disaster this huge, it demanded a totally new way of thinking. I mean, how could you possibly figure out what went wrong with an entire national economy? The old economic tools were like trying to fix a jet engine with a bicycle pump. It just wasn't going to work. Economists needed a brand new framework, a new lens to see the big picture. You see, the Great Depression wasn't just a historical event. It became the great economic mystery that basically gave birth to modern macroeconomics. The mission to understand it forced economists to start thinking about how the entire economy behaves as one giant system. And the solution they came up with was actually pretty brilliant. They took a concept most of us already get, supply and demand for one thing, like coffee or cars, and they decided to scale it way, way up. What if you could model the total demand for everything produced in a country and the total supply of everything produced? That's the big idea behind the aggregate demand and aggregate supply model. Okay, so let's dive in and start with the first half of that puzzle, demand. What in the world does it mean to talk about the total demand for all the goods and services in a whole economy? So here's the textbook definition. But in plain English, aggregate demand, or AD for short, is just the grand total of all the spending on everything in the economy, from cheeseburgers to cargo ships at a certain overall price level. It's the whole shebang. So where does all this spending come from? Well, economists see it as a machine powered by four big engines. First up, you've got consumption. That's all of us, buying our groceries, our cars, you name it. Then there's investment. That's businesses building new factories or buying new computers. Third is government spending on things like roads and national defense. And finally, net exports, which is just the difference between what the rest of the world buys from us and what we buy from them. You add them all up, C plus I plus G plus NX, and that's it. That's the total demand for the entire economy. Now, let's see what this looks like as a picture. Just like the demand curve for a single pizza, the aggregate demand curve slopes downward. And this shows us a really fundamental truth about the economy as a whole. When the overall price level falls, the total amount of stuff people want to buy, our real GDP, actually goes up. But hang on a second. Why does it do that? I mean, with one product, it's simple. If coffee gets cheaper, you buy more coffee instead of tea. But when everything gets cheaper, including people's wages, why would total spending change at all? Well, it turns out there are three really powerful economy-wide reasons. First, you've got the wealth effect. Think about it. If all prices fall, the cash you have in your wallet or your bank account can suddenly buy more stuff. You literally feel wealthier, so you spend more. Then there's the interest rate effect. When prices are low, you don't need to hold as much cash to buy things. That extra cash in the banking system pushes down interest rates, which makes it cheaper for businesses to borrow and invest. And finally, there's the international trade effect. If prices in our country fall, our goods become a bargain for folks in other countries. So our exports go up. Okay, this is an absolutely crucial point to get. A change in the overall price level just causes us to move along the curve we've already drawn. But what happens if something else changes? What if everyone suddenly gets really optimistic about the future and starts spending more, or the government kicks off a big infrastructure project? That kind of change doesn't just move us along the curve, it shifts the entire curve. And this shows you exactly what that looks like. A positive event, say a big surge in consumer confidence, shifts the whole AD curve to the right. That means that at any given price level, there's just more total spending happening. A negative shock, like the fear that gripped the country after the 1929 crash, does the opposite. It shifts the entire curve to the left. So that's the spending side of the economy. But of course, an economy isn't just about what people want to buy. It's also about what a country can actually produce. So let's pivot and look at the other half of our model, aggregate supply. What we really care about here is the long run, and long-run aggregate supply, or LRAS, represents the economy's full potential. Think of it as the absolute maximum amount the economy could produce if it were running at full, sustainable capacity, if all the factories were humming and everyone who wanted a job had one. This is determined by real things like technology and the size of the workforce, not by the price level. It's kind of like the economy's ultimate speed limit.
And because that potential output has nothing to do with prices, the LRAS curve looks like this, just a perfectly straight vertical line. It's basically saying that in the long run, whether a loaf of bread costs $2 or $20, the country's total productive capacity is what it is. You can't just magically create more stuff by jacking up prices.
All right, so we have our downward sloping demand curve and our straight up and down long-run supply curve. Now for the magic moment. Let's put them on the same graph and see what the heck they tell us.
And there it is, that single point where the two curves cross. That's the economy's long-run equilibrium. It shows us the exact price level and the level of real GDP where the total amount of spending in the economy is just enough to buy everything the economy can produce when it's running at full steam.
Now, I know this might all seem a little abstract, but this simple model is an incredibly powerful tool for making sense of real-world events. Let's take a look at a more recent example.
Remember the SARS outbreak back in 2003? It had a huge impact on travel and tourism, especially in China. People just stopped flying, they canceled their vacations, and they avoided crowded public places.
In the language of our model, this created a classic negative demand shock. Spending on tourism, which is part of both consumption and net exports, just collapsed. The AD curve shifted hard to the left. But it didn't stop there. That initial shock created ripples. The money that tourists didn't spend was income that airline workers and hotel staff didn't earn. And so, they had to cut back on their spending, and so on. This cascade, where one person's lost spending becomes another person's lost income, is what economists call the multiplier effect. And when economists tallied up the total impact, it was massive. It wasn't just the initial loss from tourism. After accounting for that whole ripple effect, they estimated the SARS outbreak shrank China's economy by over $25 billion. That is the power of a demand shock in the real world.
So, let's wrap up with the big takeaways. First, this ADAS model isn't just some boring graph. It's a powerful way to understand what's happening to the whole economy. Second, remember that aggregate demand is just total spending, and it's powered by those four engines: consumers, businesses, government, and the rest of the world. Third, in the long run, every economy has a speed limit, its potential output, shown by that vertical supply curve. And finally, and this is the most important part, the booms and recessions that shape our world can be seen as shifts in these very curves.
The ADS model was born out of the ashes of the Great Depression. It's helped us make sense of decades of economic ups and downs. But the world keeps changing, right? So the question we're left with is, what's the next great economic mystery going to be, and will this tool still be sharp enough to help us solve it?